The violent burglar who killed an elderly brother and sister in a botched robbery has today been jailed for life after dodging justice for nearly 30 years. Danville Neil, 65, attacked Second World War veteran William Bryan, 71, and 74-year-old widow Anne Castle during a break-in at their East London home in August 1993. The pensioners were beaten and restrained as their flat was ransacked in the search for valuables. Following a trial at the Old Bailey, Neil was found guilty of Mr Bryan's murder and of Mrs Castle's manslaughter. Jailing him, Mrs Justice Cheema-Grubb said. "You dodged justice for nearly 30 years, now justice has caught up with you." Neil was handed a life sentence with a minimum term of 32 years. The judge later said. "This was a notorious and universally appalling crime, both because of your history and the doubly fatal consequences of what you did." She told Neil his actions were unscrupulous and lacking in mercy, and the siblings died as a result of your greed. She added. "You were a well-established and experienced career burglar by 1993. But you had it in you to offend in a way which was far more serious." Neil pulled 2 wedding rings and 2 diamond rings from Mrs Castle's fingers, but failed to find some £4,000 in cash, some of which had been stashed in socks, the Old Bailey was told. Mrs Castle suffered a heart attack and Mr Bryan went into cardiac arrest after being beaten and smothered during the nighttime raid. No one witnessed the attack, but screams were heard by neighbors, suggesting a prolonged burglary and attack, jurors heard. Mrs Justice Cheema-Grubb told the court. "The suffering of one of them was compounded by knowing that the other had died or was dying, that is inescapable. They were left virtually opposite each other, it is not difficult to imagine, though no one would want to, the anguish they must have endured at the suffering of the other." Police were called to the address on August 23, 1993, and found Mrs Castle's body slumped in an armchair, with her brother lying on the floor. Viewers were shown images of the scene, with cushions upended on the sofa, broken glass from a vase, a lampshade askew in the corner, a pair of glasses on the floor, and Mrs Castle's handbag on the ground with the contents spilling out. A hammer and a screwdriver were recovered from the crime scene. The murders went unsolved for nearly 30 years, until Neil's DNA was found on the knot of a strap used to tie Mr Bryan's hands. The court heard Neil had a string of convictions for some 15 burglaries between 1973 and 1998. In 1984, he carried out 2 home invasions in 3 months, in which the occupants were physically assaulted. The couple were beaten with an iron bar and the wife also smothered with a pillow as their 3 children slept in their home in Penge, South London. The husband's hands were tied up with a belt and Neil attempted to pull the wife's ring from her finger. Although no children were harmed, Neil told the couple. "Your kid's dead, right? We've killed your little girl, got it? Tell us where the money is or we'll smash your heads in." 2 months later, Neil assaulted another woman after breaking into her home in Norbury, South London, before making off with a music centre and £15 in cash. He was jailed for the 2 violent burglaries and released on license in August 1992, a year before the double murders. During his trial, Neil had accepted his DNA was found at the scene of the killings, but denied he had been there or knew the victims. He claimed an innocent explanation for the forensic link was that he had sold Mr Bryan binoculars at a car boot sale and it was the strap that was used to bind him. But Mrs Castle's grandson remembered his great-uncle was keen on gadgets and had 2 sets of binoculars which he would have bought new. Jurors heard that the victims had lived together in a flat in Bethnal Green since Mr Bryan was invalided out of the army in 1945, with Mrs Castle being widowed in 1987. Detective Chief Inspector Joanna York of the Met Specialist Crime North Command said. 29 years of not knowing how their loved ones died and who was responsible. That is a pain no one should have to endure and I just hope this result can bring them some small comfort and peace of mind. Anne's daughters, Janice and Cynthia, said. Our mother spent her whole life in East London where she raised her 5 children, who went on to give her 13 grandchildren and 15 great-grandchildren. She was the most wonderful, loving and caring mother and grandmother who was thoughtful in every way. She always put everyone before herself and was a great pillar of the community, well loved and respected by all who knew her. Anne and William, known locally as Annie and Billy, were siblings who had lived on the Minerva estate for almost 50 years. A statement from Mrs Castle's granddaughter, read out to the court, described her as a pillar of the community who was well loved and respected by everybody. It went on to say the pair showed all the things which are good in people. Another family statement said. For almost 30 years a weight has been over our shoulders. Cheers and applause were heard in the public gallery as the sentence was given. Our sincere condolences and sympathies go out to the family and loved ones of Anne Castle, 74, and Second World War veteran William Bryan, 71.